The night was calm in Los Angeles, but inside Sandra Bullock's heart, there was a quiet storm. She had just finished another long day, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, and playing her role as a star. But when the lights dimmed and the crowd faded, she often felt the weight of silence. She wondered if anyone truly saw her, beyond the fame, beyond the roles, beyond the endless applause. She was not broken, but she was tired. It was on one such night that Keanu Reeves called her. His voice was steady, calm, and warm. "How are you holding up, Sandra?" he asked. He didn't ask about movies or red carpets. He asked about her heart. That small question hit deeper than she expected. She paused, her eyes wet with tears she had been hiding all evening. "I'm fine," she whispered, though they both knew fine was not the truth. Keanu didn't push her. He simply stayed on the line, letting her know he was there. Keanu had always been different from others in Hollywood. He carried pain quietly, yet he turned that pain into kindness. He had faced loss, loneliness, and betrayal, but he never allowed bitterness to take root. Instead, he offered gentleness to those around him. Sandra had seen it before. The way he would sit with a struggling crew member. The way he would give his seat to strangers. The way he always remembered small details people thought were forgotten. As Sandra listened to him breathe on the other end of the phone, she felt something rare. Safety. In a world where everyone wanted something from her, Keanu wanted nothing. He only wanted to stand beside her. The next day, Sandra had an important event. She had promised to attend, but her heart wasn't ready. Her smile felt forced, her energy drained. When she stepped out of the car, cameras flashed like 1,000 suns, but all she could think of was how empty she felt inside. In that moment, she almost turned back, but she stopped when she saw him. Keanu was already there, standing quietly by the entrance, waiting for her. He wasn't there to shine in front of the cameras. He wasn't there for headlines. He was there because he knew she needed him. His presence was calm, steady, like a shield. Sandra walked toward him, her steps shaky. But when she reached his side, she felt grounded. The crowd saw 2 stars, but she felt like a friend had just carried half her weight. Throughout the evening, Keanu noticed the small signs of her struggle, the way her smile would falter when no one was looking, the way she clutched her hands when the crowd grew too loud, the way her eyes wandered as if searching for air. He never asked her to explain. Instead, he offered her what no one else could, quiet care. He leaned close and whispered, "Breathe, Sandra. You're not alone." His words were simple, but they pierced through the storm inside her. As the night went on, something unexpected happened. The people in the room began to notice. Keanu was not performing. He was not putting on a show. He was simply being there for her in the most human way. And somehow that sincerity touched everyone. Whispers spread through the crowd. People saw the way he guided her gently when she looked lost. The way he stood behind her like a wall of strength when cameras pressed too close. The way he smiled at her not as a star, but as a person. By the end of the evening, Sandra realized she had not collapsed under the weight she carried. She had walked through it, step by step, because Keanu had quietly shared her burden. Later, when they sat together away from the noise, Sandra finally allowed the truth to fall from her lips. "I don't know how you do it, Keanu. How do you always stand strong when life tries to crush you?" He looked at her with gentle eyes and said, "Life will always test us, Sandra. But sometimes strength is not about standing alone. Sometimes it's about standing beside someone else." Her eyes welled with tears again, but this time they were not from loneliness. They were from the rare comfort of knowing she was seen. She was cared for, and she was not alone. That night, Sandra lay in bed thinking about his words. She thought about how millions admired Keanu for his movies, but few knew the deeper truth, that his greatest role was not on screen, but in life where he lived with humility, kindness, and respect. And she knew in her heart the care he showed her that night was not just for her. It was the same care he carried for the world. A quiet reminder that even in the loudest rooms, kindness can still speak the loudest. This was only the beginning of a journey that would test both of them in ways they never expected. A journey where respect, resilience, and humility would face trials, and where hearts would be melted by acts of care no one could ignore. The days that followed brought new challenges for Sandra. She had agreed to work on a film that demanded not only her skills as an actress, but also her emotional strength. The script was heavy, filled with scenes of loss and grief. And though she had played difficult roles before, this one felt too close to her own hidden struggles. She questioned herself. Could she truly give what the role demanded when she herself felt so fragile inside? Keanu noticed the weight she carried long before she spoke of it. He had a way of seeing past masks, past polished smiles, past the words people threw into the air. One afternoon, he visited her on set without telling her in advance. She was in her trailer sitting on the floor holding the script with trembling hands. The moment she saw him, she forced a smile, but he didn't fall for it. "You don't have to pretend with me, Sandra," he said softly. She let the script drop to the floor, her voice cracking. "This role feels like my own story. I don't know if I can do this." Keanu didn't try to fix her pain with empty words. Instead, he sat down on the floor beside her. Silence filled the trailer, but it was not heavy. It was healing. After a while, he spoke. "Sometimes the roles that hurt us are the ones that teach us the most. Maybe this is not about acting. Maybe it's about letting yourself feel and trusting that you won't face it alone." His words stayed with her as she walked back on set. In the hardest scenes, when she felt tears welling beyond control, she remembered that he was nearby. And when the director called cut, she would often find him standing at the edge of the set. Not intruding, not trying to rescue, but simply watching with the quiet strength of someone who believed in her. But not everyone around them understood. Rumors began to spread. Whispers in the industry claimed that Keanu was wasting his time standing by her side, that he was distracting her from her work, that maybe he was only there because of some hidden reason. These words reached Sandra, and though she tried to brush them off, they cut deeply. One evening, she confessed to Keanu, "People are talking. They think you're here because you pity me or because you don't have your own battles to fight. I don't want to drag you into my storm." He listened calmly, his face gentle but firm. "Sandra, let them talk. People will always create stories when they don't understand the truth. I'm not here for them. I'm here for you. You're not dragging me into your storm. You're reminding me why standing beside someone matters." Those words struck her heart like a promise. A few days later, something happened on set that tested everything. During a highly emotional scene, Sandra broke down in front of the cameras. Her voice cracked, her body shook, and the director shouted, "Cut." The crew grew silent, unsure how to react. Sandra stood frozen, ashamed of her own collapse. She whispered, "I can't do this," and tried to leave. But Keanu walked forward, breaking the silence. He didn't care that dozens of eyes were on him. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "You can, and you will, because what they need from you is not perfection. They need your truth." The set fell quiet again, but this time the silence was different. People saw not just two stars, but two human beings standing together in raw honesty. When Sandra returned to the scene, she delivered her lines with a depth that left everyone speechless. The director whispered, "That was real." Later that night, when they were alone, Sandra looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "You didn't just save me in that moment, Keanu. You showed me that my pain could become my strength." He shook his head softly. "No, Sandra. You saved yourself. I only reminded you of the power you already had." Their bond grew stronger after that day. But as their connection deepened, so did the challenges. The world began to watch more closely. Headlines speculated about their relationship, some praising, others criticizing. Yet through all the noise, one thing remained clear. Keanu stood by her with unwavering care, and Sandra began to rediscover parts of herself she thought she had lost. What neither of them knew was that a far greater test was waiting ahead. A test that would not only measure their resilience but also reveal truths neither of them expected. The weeks passed, and Sandra's film began to draw attention even before its release. Critics whispered about the raw emotion they had heard from inside the set. People sensed that something unusual was unfolding, something that went beyond acting. But behind the whispers, Sandra still carried her quiet storms. Every time she faced a crowd, she felt like she was wearing armor too heavy for her body. And every time the armor slipped, she feared the world would see the tired heart beneath. Keanu never told her to be stronger. He never told her to hide her weakness. Instead, he reminded her that strength and weakness could live together. One evening, when they walked out of the studio under the dim streetlights, Sandra asked him, "Don't you ever get tired of carrying everyone else's weight?" He paused, looking at her with calm eyes. "I don't carry it alone, Sandra. Every time I choose kindness, it lightens my own weight too." His words sank into her like soft rain, but not everyone wanted to see their bond in that light. Tabloids began to write stories, some filled with praise, others with cruel speculation. Headlines claimed that Sandra was leaning too much on Keanu, that she was weak, that Keanu's kindness was only a mask for something else. The noise grew louder every day, and even though Sandra tried to ignore it, the whispers crawled into her thoughts. One afternoon, while rehearsing a scene, she froze midway. Her hands trembled, her chest tightened, and her eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back. The director called for a break, and she walked away quickly, hiding her face. She found a quiet corner of the studio, sat down, and buried her head in her hands. Keanu found her there. He knelt beside her and spoke gently. "What happened?" She shook her head, ashamed. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Keanu. Everyone sees me as weak. They think I'm nothing without you standing next to me. Maybe they're right." He didn't answer immediately. He waited until she lifted her eyes to meet his. Then he spoke in a voice so steady it cut through her fear. "They don't see the truth, Sandra. Weakness is not in asking for help. Weakness is in pretending you never need it. You face storms most people can't even imagine. You're still here. That's not weakness. That's resilience." Her tears flowed harder, not from pain, but from the relief of being understood. The next day, she returned to set with a new fire inside her. When the cameras rolled, she delivered a performance so raw, so human, that the entire crew stood silent when the director finally whispered, "Cut." No one clapped, no one spoke. They simply stood in awe. Sandra had poured her soul into the scene, and it was undeniable. Later, when she sat with Keanu under the fading studio lights, she whispered, "Today felt different. It felt like I wasn't hiding anymore." He smiled softly. "Because you weren't. You gave them your truth. And truth has more power than perfection ever will." But the world outside the studio was not ready to stay silent. The film's trailer released soon after, and it spread across screens everywhere. Social media buzzed with comments about Sandra's raw emotion. Many praised her, but others were cruel, questioning her stability, mocking her vulnerability. Sandra read some of the comments late one night, and her hands shook as she scrolled. She felt her chest tighten again. But before despair could swallow her, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Keanu. It read, "Don't let the noise steal your voice. The same world that mocks you today will stand in awe tomorrow. I'll be here until that day comes." She placed her phone against her chest, tears streaming silently. In that moment, she knew that his presence was not about saving her. It was about walking beside her until she remembered her own strength. What neither of them knew was that the film's premiere would bring a storm bigger than any they had yet faced, a night where the world's eyes would be on them both, and where one unexpected twist would test not just their bond, but their very understanding of kindness, humility, and resilience. The night of the premiere arrived with a kind of electricity in the air. Bright lights filled the streets, cameras flashed endlessly, and crowds lined up just to catch a glimpse of the stars. For Sandra, the evening felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. She had poured her heart into the film, and now the world would judge not just her work, but the pieces of her soul she had placed into it. When she stepped out of the car, her legs trembled under the weight of the moment. The roar of the crowd pressed against her ears. Her hands clutched tightly at her dress, almost as if holding it together would keep her heart from falling apart. But then, as always, she saw him. Keanu stood nearby, calm, grounded, his eyes steady. When their gazes met, she felt a rush of air return to her lungs. He walked toward her, ignoring the chaos of cameras. He offered his arm, and when she took it, the crowd erupted in cheers. To everyone else, it looked like a perfect Hollywood moment. But to Sandra, it was something far deeper. It was the quiet strength she needed to take the next step forward. Inside the theater, the lights dimmed and the film began. The silence of the audience was heavy as each scene played. When Sandra's most emotional performance appeared on screen, the room grew even quieter. She could feel her heart racing, afraid of judgment. She looked down for a moment, unable to bear the thought of eyes dissecting her pain. Then, without making a sound, Keanu reached over and gently held her hand. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. The simple act spoke louder than any words. You are not alone. When the credits rolled, the audience erupted in applause. Some people even stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. Sandra was overwhelmed. She had never felt so exposed, yet so strangely free. But as she turned to Keanu, she noticed his eyes were not on the crowd. He was watching her as though the only applause that mattered was the quiet one in his heart. Outside, however, the storm had already begun. Reporters swarmed with questions, pushing microphones close. Some praised her work, while others asked cutting questions about her emotional breakdowns during filming, hinting at weakness. Sandra froze under the sharp words. Before she could answer, Keanu stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. Sandra's performance was not weakness. It was honesty. And honesty is what makes art unforgettable. The crowd grew silent for a moment, surprised by his boldness. Sandra looked at him in awe. He had not defended her like a shield. He had spoken the truth she needed the world to hear. But that night did not end with applause. As they left the venue, a harsh voice rose from the crowd. A man shouted, "She only shines because of you, Keanu. Without you, she's nothing." The words pierced through the air like a knife. Sandra's heart sank. She lowered her head, fighting back tears. But Keanu stopped in his tracks. He turned toward the voice, his expression steady but unshakable. "You're wrong," he said firmly. "Sandra shines because she has the courage to be real in a world that asks her to be fake. I only stood beside her so the world wouldn't miss the light she already carries." For a moment, even the crowd was silent. The man who had shouted lowered his head in shame. And Sandra, standing beside Keanu, felt her tears finally fall, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Later that night, when they sat together in the quiet of her home, Sandra whispered, "Why do you keep doing this for me, Keanu? Why do you stand by me when the world tries to tear me down?" He leaned back, his voice soft but steady. "Because I know what it feels like to be torn down. And I know how much it means when someone stands beside you anyway." Her heart ached with emotion. She realized then that his kindness came not from pity, but from his own scars. And in that realization, she felt her respect for him deepen beyond words. But the story was far from over. The film's success would bring them into a brighter spotlight than ever before. And with the light came shadows, whispers, jealousy, and challenges that neither of them had expected. Storms still waited ahead, storms that would test whether their bond was strong enough to endure. The weeks after the premiere turned into a blur of attention. The film soared, breaking records, praised for its raw honesty and emotional depth. Critics called it Sandra's most powerful performance, and interviews flooded in from every direction. People wanted to know how she had reached such a vulnerable place on screen. Some praised her bravery, but others dug into her personal life, twisting her struggles into cruel questions. Sandra tried to keep her focus on the good, but the weight of constant exposure became heavy. Every headline, every comment, every speculation about her and Keanu seemed to scrape at her heart. One night, as she sat in her living room scrolling through endless articles, she whispered to herself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I only made it through because of him." Keanu arrived just then, carrying 2 cups of tea. He set one in front of her, noticing the sorrow in her eyes. "What are you reading?" he asked softly. She shook her head, ashamed. "People keep saying I'm nothing without you, that I only survived because you carried me." He sat across from her, his voice calm but steady. "They don't understand. I didn't carry you, Sandra. I stood with you. You carried yourself. All I did was remind you that you could." His words soothed her for a moment, but the storm of voices outside never truly stopped. Soon after, they were invited to a major awards ceremony. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, but Sandra felt her chest tighten as the day approached. She dreaded the questions, the flashing lights, the judgment hidden behind polite smiles. When the night came, she dressed in quiet elegance, her nerves trembling beneath the surface. Keanu met her at the entrance, and once again his presence steadied her. "Just breathe," he whispered as they walked in together. Inside the hall, the atmosphere was grand, filled with applause and flashing cameras. When Sandra's name was announced as the winner, the room erupted in cheers. She rose to her feet slowly, her heart pounding. Keanu squeezed her hand gently, a silent encouragement, and she walked to the stage. As she stood before the microphone, the weight of the moment pressed on her. She could feel thousands of eyes watching, waiting. She wanted to thank everyone, but the words caught in her throat. The doubts in her head grew louder. They think you're weak. They think you only shine because of him. Her hands trembled. Silence began to stretch uncomfortably in the hall. And then, in the corner of her eye, she saw him. Keanu sitting calmly, nodding once as if to say, "You can do this." A deep breath filled her lungs, and suddenly the fear began to fade. She spoke, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "This award, it is not just for me. It is for anyone who has ever been told they are weak because they needed help. I stand here not because I was perfect, but because I was human. And being human means we all fall and we all rise again, sometimes with the help of someone who cares enough to stand beside us." The room fell silent, her words sinking deep. Then applause erupted, louder than before. Some even rose to their feet, clapping not just for her performance, but for her truth. Tears blurred her vision as she left the stage. When she returned to her seat, Keanu leaned in and whispered, "You didn't just win an award tonight, Sandra. You reminded the world of what real strength looks like." But that victory brought a new wave of challenges. The media twisted her words, some celebrating her message, others mocking it, calling it a speech of weakness. And though she tried to stay calm, the endless cycle of judgment wore on her spirit. One night, as rain poured outside, Sandra finally broke down. She sat on her porch, hugging her knees, whispering, "I can't keep fighting everyone, Keanu. Maybe I should just step away from all of this." He sat beside her in the rain, not caring that they were both getting soaked. "You don't have to fight everyone," he said gently. "You only have to fight for yourself, for your peace, for your truth. Let the world say what it wants. The people who matter will hear your heart." She leaned against him, tears mixing with the rain. His quiet care once again gave her strength. But deep inside, both of them knew that the true test was yet to come, a moment that would not only challenge their resilience but also reveal the full depth of Keanu's heart before the world. The storm they had been waiting for arrived sooner than expected. A journalist, known for being sharp and unforgiving, scheduled a live interview with Sandra. The world tuned in, expecting drama, expecting weakness, expecting a chance to see her stumble. Sandra almost refused, but Keanu encouraged her with his steady words. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk straight into the storm. I'll be there." The studio lights were harsh, brighter than any camera flashes she had faced. As the interview began, the journalist wasted no time. His voice was sharp, his questions cutting. "Sandra, people say your career only survived because Keanu Reeves carried you through. What do you say to that?" The words pierced her chest, but before she could respond, Keanu, seated beside her, leaned closer to the microphone. His voice was calm yet powerful. "If standing by a friend when they need you is considered carrying them, then I will gladly carry her 1,000 times. But the truth is, Sandra carried herself. She walked through storms most people wouldn't survive. I only stood beside her so she wouldn't have to walk alone." The audience grew silent. The journalist, unsettled, pressed further. "But do you admit she is weaker than others in Hollywood?" Sandra's heart raced. Her breath caught. For a moment, she feared she might crumble under the cruelty of the question. But then Keanu turned to her, his eyes steady, and gave the smallest nod. It was enough. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Weakness is pretending you never struggle. Strength is admitting you hurt and still choosing to move forward. If the world sees me as weak because I needed help, then let it. Because I would rather be seen as weak and real than strong and empty." The hall fell completely silent. The journalist froze, caught off guard by her honesty. And then slowly, applause began to rise from the audience. At first it was a few claps, then dozens, then the entire room. People stood, clapping louder and louder. Keanu placed his hand gently on hers. "You just turned their judgment into respect," he whispered. After the interview, clips of the moment spread everywhere. Millions watched her words, replaying the moment she stood in her truth. Hashtags filled social media, not mocking her, but praising her courage. People began to share their own stories of struggle and resilience, inspired by her honesty. But the most powerful moment came days later, when Sandra stood on stage at a charity event. The crowd was large, but this time she wasn't afraid. She spoke with strength she once thought she had lost. "We all need someone to stand with us at times. I had that person, and it saved me. If you ever get the chance, be that person for someone else. Because kindness is not weakness. It is the greatest strength we have." The crowd rose to their feet, applause filling the hall. Tears glistened in the eyes of strangers, moved by the truth of her words. Keanu, standing off to the side, lowered his head humbly. He never wanted the spotlight. All he wanted was for her to find her own again. Later that night, as they walked together under the quiet sky, Sandra turned to him. Her voice was soft but full of emotion. "Keanu, you didn't just stand by me. You taught me how to stand again," he smiled gently. "No, Sandra. You always knew how. You just needed someone to remind you of your strength." She felt tears well in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, of healing, of hope. The story of Sandra and Keanu spread far beyond Hollywood. It was no longer about movies or fame. It became a story of kindness, resilience, humility, and care. People around the world found comfort in knowing that even those who seem untouchable carry storms, and that true strength is found not in hiding the pain, but in standing together through it. In the end, what touched millions was not the lights, not the awards, not the fame. It was something much simpler. A man who chose to stand by a friend with quiet care, and a woman who found the courage to let the world see her heart. And as their story showed, care this pure doesn't just heal one person. It melts every heart it touches. 7 months had passed since that unforgettable interview, but its impact still echoed across the world. Sandra was no longer seen only as a star. She had become a symbol of truth, of resilience, of courage. Her words were quoted in magazines, shared in schools, repeated by people who once doubted her. She had not just defended herself. She had given a voice to millions who once felt too weak to speak. Yet behind the applause, she still wondered if she deserved it. One evening, as she sat with Keanu in a small cafe far from Hollywood, she confessed, "People see me as strong now, but sometimes I still feel like the same woman who almost collapsed under the pressure." Keanu looked at her quietly before answering. "That's because strength isn't about never falling, Sandra. It's about falling and still choosing to stand again. And you've done that, every single time." Their bond had grown beyond what anyone expected. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't about headlines. It was about two souls who had found safety in each other's presence. They carried scars, but those scars had become proof of their humanity, not shame to be hidden. The real test came when a charity invited Sandra to speak at a global summit. Not as an actress, but as a voice for resilience. The thought terrified her, but Keanu encouraged her once again. "You've already spoken your truth, Sandra. This time, the world just wants to hear it louder." The day of the summit, leaders, celebrities, and thousands of ordinary people filled the hall. Cameras were everywhere, capturing every detail. Sandra walked to the podium slowly, her hands trembling. But when she glanced at the side of the stage, there he was. Keanu stood quietly, watching with the same steady calm that had carried her through every storm. She took a deep breath and began. "For a long time, I thought being strong meant being silent. I thought it meant smiling when I was breaking inside. But I learned that real strength is not in hiding pain, it's in admitting it and still choosing to move forward. I wouldn't have learned this without someone who reminded me that care is not weakness. It is the greatest gift we can give each other." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. Then she added, "And if you take one thing from me today, let it be this. Stand beside someone. Not to carry them, not to fix them, but simply so they don't have to walk alone. Sometimes that small act of kindness can change a life." The hall erupted in applause, not the kind reserved for performances, but the kind that comes from hearts being moved. People stood clapping. some with tears running down their cheeks. Keanu, still in the corner, lowered his head humbly, never seeking the spotlight. But in that moment, everyone understood. It was his quiet care that had helped Sandra find her voice again. After the summit, people across the world shared their own stories of kindness. Letters poured in. Strangers wrote about how they had stood by friends, families, and even strangers. Sandra and Keanu's story had sparked something larger than either of them could have imagined. That evening, as they walked away from the hall, Sandra turned to him. "You stood by me when I thought I had nothing left. You didn't just change my story, Keanu. You reminded me that kindness can change the world." He smiled softly, looking at her with gentle eyes. "The world doesn't need more perfect people, Sandra. It needs more people willing to care, and you've become one of them." She felt her heart swell with gratitude. Her storms had not vanished, but now she knew she was not defined by them. She had walked through the fire and come out stronger, not alone, but with someone who chose to stand beside her every step. The story of Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock was not about fame or movies or the glitter of Hollywood. It was about something far greater, how one person's quiet care could melt not just a single heart, but millions around the world. And in the end, the lesson was simple. Strength is not silence, kindness is not weakness, and care, when given freely, has the power to heal the deepest wounds.